when we love and we revere these archetypes, even without knowing that they represent the middle way, but we love these like highly aligned spiritual beings that then we can feel are calling us into our higher self, it's because they're representing deep within our subconscious the knowledge that they are holding the symbolism and the representation of being that path to liberation. In mysticism, what you'll always find is that there is an archetype to represent the middle way. The middle way is so important. And so because it's so important and key to our own gnosis, to our own salvation, to our own integration, and to our own self-sovereignty, this archetype of the middle way is always represented as an alchemical entity or an alchemical being that can hold all of the different elements and all of the different energies and impulses that we experience, but it can hold them all and then alchemize them into what's called the middle way. And so this concept of there being a middle way naturally means that there's something beyond there being middle. And what that is extremes. So in alchemy, we would look at those extremes as it being one extreme as spirit and the other extreme as matter. And all of alchemy is between and regarding the spirit-matter continuum. And within this spirit-matter continuum, the middle way and the archetype that will represent the middle way, which is the path of sovereignty and liberation, is one that holds the center point, the integration of those extremes. So you could look at the middle way as being the liberation because we are not bound and blinded by either of the extremes. If we go all the way into the material, all the way into matter, we will get addicted and attached completely to it, to the point where we can't actually truly say that it's by our own free will. Because once we are completely fragmented, completely divided, all into the material, we have been placed in spiritual amnesia. So you see, if spirit's all the way over here on the opposite end of the continuum, we have spiritual amnesia. We think we're just a being that's experiencing the earthly realm and that there's nothing else beyond the earthly realm and that we're only our identity, we're only the egoic identity. And then we look at everything through the lens of there being a material realm and all the attachments that come with the material realm above all else. So this is one end of the spectrum. And so in this end, we're completely lost in the identity with the body. But then all the way over here, on the spiritual aspect of this continuum, if we're lost in this extreme, then what we're doing is having a rejection, a disdain, and even a repulsion to the material, to all things on the opposite end of this, which is matter. And so then we will favor and we will regard the spiritual as being far more superior than the material. And so this impulse over here at this extreme will be lost in as well. We will be blinded and we will lose sight of the truth of the middle way when we are completely lost on this end of the polarity of the extreme. So this is where we view ourselves as really being the higher self at the expense, at the detriment to our personal self, the one that we would call the ego. And so when we're lost in these two extremes, they take on belief systems far more than what I'm even talking about here. It's just that if we look all the way back to the roots of whatever belief systems that we'll find, they'll be traced back to either being bound to the material or bound to the spiritual in a battle against one another, because they are extremes. Now, the middle way is how we perform the spiritual alchemy to harmonize these two extremes, to bring coherency to them, balance and integration. And when we do that, what we'll see is that that alchemy creates not only a harmony, but taking these two and using them together constructively in a way where they benefit from one another. And when they benefit from one another, what they're doing is coming into union. And there's always an archetype in esoterica and in mysticism that represents the middle way and this path of sovereignty. And what it's being sovereign from is the blindedness, the attachment, and the boundness that comes from being in either of these extremes, of being completely lost in our ego and completely in amnesia of our heart center, that we are more than just our physical self in this one experience. And then all the way over here on the spiritual end of the spectrum, where we get completely lost in disidentification. So these two forces of spirit and matter benefit one another if we allow them to integrate within our body-mind-spirit complex. And so the middle way has been represented as the archetype in past ages as Mithras. And then this figure has also been held through Buddhism, through Buddha. And in this age, we most know this archetype of the middle way through Christ. And so even if we look at the Kabbalah and the tree of life in Kabbalah, what we'll find is that there's these two pillars on each side of the center. And these two pillars max out. That's the representation of how, when we go all the way to one extreme or all the way to the other extreme, they will reach a point where they cannot go any further. They are maxed out. And so they are not free. It's not coming from free will. And so what this center archetype represents is free will. The center middle way archetype always represents free will, because if you have any form of ultimate attachment to either one of this spirit or matter continuum, you cannot fully say you have free will. You're just lost in an extreme and an extreme imbalance, and therefore it's merely just the behaviors, the patterns, the actions, the thinking that are all coming from the possession of that imbalance. That's not free will. The middle way always represents an archetypal figure that can integrate both of these extremes and therefore cultivate free will. And so free will in this case isn't something that's a given. Instead, it's something that we all start off with, but we have to cultivate, just like a seed that needs the nourishment of sunlight, of water, of care, in order for that seed to fully come into fruition and maturity into a beautiful flower. And just the same for our free will. And so when we love and we revere these archetypes, even without knowing that they represent the middle way, but we love these like highly aligned spiritual beings that then we can feel are calling us into our higher self. It's because they're representing deep within our subconscious the knowledge that they are holding the symbolism and the representation of being that path to liberation, that middle way that goes above where the other two pillars cannot go. They max out, but this one, the middle way, can go all the way descension, downward, and ascension, upward. And what that is a representation of the masculine and feminine hemispheres once they're in harmony and union together, and the power of it being able to descend, which is feminine, and ascend, which is masculine. But they're not fighting each other, and they're not in conflict with one another. So what you have is not just a representation of the middle way. You actually have the being, but also hold the full spiritual power to descend deeply into themselves in an intimate way that meets themselves. And just like water goes to the deepest and lowest parts of the experience, and just how water can seep all the way downward where no other element can be able to reach. We have that power just as much as we have to ascend when we're following and practicing the inner work to cultivate that middle way. So we're going deeply into descension as well as deeply into ascension. Now, usually ascension and descension get pitted against one another because ascension and descension are seen as extremes. Just like ascension would belong to the spirit extreme or polarity, and then the other one would be descension, which would belong to the material or matter end of the spectrum. But these two forces, once again, are rectified and unified in the middle way, where they're not against one another. There's freedom now, freedom to descend because we're not in resistance and we're not blinded by disidentification. So we can descend into our emotional body and descend into our physical vehicle. And then we can ascend, and we would need this greatly. We would need to ascend, which is very important because this is what ensures that we have spiritual sovereignty. We will not have spiritual sovereignty if we do not value both descension and ascension. The reason why is because ascension is highly, highly valuable for after this life, and descension is highly valuable for cultivating and preparing our body, mind, spirit during this life and after. So this is why it's very important, but also why people don't get into the esoteric layer of reality. They don't value mysticism really, unless their soul is really prepared for this work in a lifetime. And so because of that, it's not something that would need to be pushed on others, but rather a calling, a deep soul level calling for somebody who's ready to do the middle way, to be able to take these extremes, see through them, see through all the teachings that are laid out in these extremes, and then rectify them within oneself. And this is really the great work of this age, because what you'll find is that beyond these two extremes and there being a middle way, there's actually just two things happening. And those two things are there's denial or there's truth. And when we're in denial, we'll produce all sorts of cleverness to hide that we're in denial. And when we've chosen a path of denial and lying, we won't be honest with ourselves, therefore we can't be honest with others, therefore we can't see others, because we can't even see ourselves. This is all distortion upon distortion. And it's really hard to be able to see the fact that we are in some sort of reality that needs clarification if we're lost in cleverness, because we'll hide that from ourselves and we'll just start to value things that aren't about sincerity, about cultivating this integration and this middle path. Instead, we'll form beliefs that really highly value one imbalanced extreme to the other. And it'll just be based off of our own preference for cleverness and denial, which extreme we fall under. But if we are truly sincere, then we don't care about hiding things from ourselves and therefore hiding things from others. What we really just care about is accuracy and truthfulness. Even if the truthfulness really means, is there truth at all? We're not concerned with just holding on to beliefs for the sake of beliefs and feeling comforted. Instead, we value just truth, whatever that might be, and however much it will grow and evolve. And because of that, that's called sincerity. And so we'll see that there's a middle way with two extremes at each side. And then we'll see that beyond that, there's just two paths, one of sincerity and one of cleverness. One is rooted in truth, the other one is rooted in denial. And the more that we're able to really just be more transparent with ourselves, be more transparent in the world, we'll see that what's being cultivated is a sincerity. And when we have sincerity, we can't really go wrong. We can't turn a wrong way with sincerity. It'll just be something that will turn into alchemy, that will alchemize. Because what we're invested in, what we're motivated and driven by, is truth. And that will always lead, even if it looks dark, even if it looks light. Doesn't really matter, it's beyond that. It will always lead one way or another to sovereignty and the middle path. So the real truth behind the middle path and beyond these extremes is one that's oriented in spirit, the other that's oriented deeply in matter. And then just those two extremes are really forms of denial. And the middle way would represent the healing of that denial, the healing of that fracture, and then cultivating sincerity and truth. I hope this has brought you to the middle way. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.